A warm welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Last week we began conversations surrounding the Middle East following the attack by Hamas militants on Israeli communities and cities, killing more than 1,300 people. Israel retaliated with attacks on the Gaza Strip, said to be the hideout for Hamas militants. And that's where we are today. Israeli bombing campaign of the Gaza Strip launched in the aftermath has killed more than 2,300 people. Israel is now planning a ground offensive in Gaza and has warned 1.1 million Palestinians living in North Gaza to evacuate south. Hamas has called on people to defy the warnings and stay put. The people have been fleeing by vehicle or on foot. There are many interested parties in this. You have the US, the UK, some other European countries, and of course the Arab allies. You have those who sit on the fence calling for both sides to end the hostilities, to end the airstrikes for the sake of innocent civilians being killed. But as you may have learned from my interview last week with the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria, Michael Freeman, Israel believes Hamas militants hide amongst civilians in Gaza, using them as human shields. I encourage you to watch the interview again from our playlist at youtube.com/channelsweb. According to the Israeli Defense Forces, at least 120 people were taken captive when Hamas attacked last week. There is right now an Israeli blockade against Gaza, so no food, no fuel or water, although we understand now the water's been restored to Gaza. But it's really hard for the people on the ground. They're suffering, hospitals are overwhelmed, and the outrage is growing over the Israeli attacks. Here's more. It's Sunday, a week after the Hamas attacks on Israel and the Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, and a few days since Israel announced it is cutting food, fuel and water from the Gaza Strip. But on Sunday, Israel opens the water pipes into Gaza. Residents queue for water in Khan Yunis at water distribution stations. Israel's energy minister said the decision to renew water supplies to parts of southern Gaza was agreed on between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US President Joe Biden. Hours before, Mr. Netanyahu vowed to demolish Hamas as his military prepares to move into the Gaza Strip in search of Islamist militants whose deadly rampage through Israeli border towns shocked the world. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says Israel has no interest in waging war on its northern front, and that if the Lebanese group Hezbollah restrains itself, Israel would respect the situation along the border as it is today. He says sporadic fire across the Israeli-Lebanon border over the past week has raised concerns that fighting with Hamas militants in Gaza could escalate into a broader conflict. Meanwhile, several people were feared dead after an Israeli airstrike on a building in Gaza's Al-Shati refugee camp, as civil defense forces and residents worked on finding survivors. The Palestinian Health Ministry said early on Sunday that 300 people, mostly children and women, had been killed, and 800 more had been injured in Gaza during the last 24 hours. Over in Jabalia refugee camp, residents and rescuers dug for survivors after an Israeli airstrike hit. The injured were carried on a stretcher as crowds of people stood on the side, with fading grey smoke still billowing in the aftermath of the attack. A nearby hospital received dozens of injured people, most of whom were women and children. Over in Israel, residents of the southern town of Sderot boarded buses to evacuate to other areas of the country, as rocket barrages from the Hamas-run Gaza Strip continued.
We live in Sderot because the situation is very dangerous here. We're waiting live to a lot.
Because terrorists, especially because terrorists.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, just before he boarded the plane back to the U.S. from Cairo, says everyone is determined to stop a spillover of the conflict. Mr. Blinken has visited Jordan, Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt to discuss the volatile situation between Israel and Hamas. He reaffirmed Israel's fight to defend itself, while insisting that it should be done in a way that avoids harming civilians.
Israel has the right, indeed it has the obligation, to defend itself against these attacks from Hamas and to try to do what it can to make sure that this never happens again. As I said in Tel Aviv, as President Biden has said, the way that Israel does this matters. Needs to do it in a way that affirms the shared values that we have for human life and human dignity, taking every possible precaution to avoid harming civilians.
Canada says the number of citizens killed in last week's attack by Hamas on Israel is now 5.
Since our last technical briefing on Friday, sadly, one Canadian who was missing has now been confirmed as deceased, and we have had confirmation of another death. As a result, Global Affairs Canada is aware of the deaths of 5 Canadians. We also continue to follow up on the cases of 3 other missing Canadians.
Like other countries, Canada is trying to evacuate its citizens, permanent residents and other families from Gaza. There are about 300 people in Gaza that Canada is seeking to bring out through the Rafah border crossing into Egypt. The U.S. has advised its citizens in Gaza to move towards the Rafah border crossing to be ready for a possible reopening. Finally, France says death toll of French citizens from the Hamas attacks in Israel has risen to 19, and 13 others are still unaccounted for and may have been taken hostage. Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna insists Israel has the right to defend itself, but that it should respect international humanitarian law and protect civilians in doing so.
Pour certains d'entre eux, peut-être sont retenus en otage.
I want to bring in Dr. Mukhtar Imam. He is an associate professor of international relations and diplomacy. He's also author of the book U.S. Interest in Israeli Occupation of Palestine. Dr. Imam, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a week since the Hamas attack on Israel and days since the Israeli Defense Forces retaliated on Hamas militants in the Gaza Strip. Many people have decried the Israeli attacks and the blockade, say that innocent civilians are being killed. Is it possible for the Israeli forces to attack Hamas without any civilian casualties in the process?
Well, you see, first and foremost, we must situate the conversation within the context of what is actually playing out on the ground. That way, it gives you a better nuance and a better grasp of the situation. If I were to answer your question headlong, I would say every Palestinian is Hamas. But then, like I said, there's the need to place this within proper context for understanding. The crisis in Palestine did not just start yesterday. It did not just start with the ongoing conflict between Israel and, of course, the Hamas in Palestine. All of these basically have taken time with the Balfour Declaration from the 2nd of November in 1917 up till the period of 1947-48, when the first Nakba, by the way, a Nakba is mass exodus or mass exiting of people or alienation of people from a particular place. All of these have culminated to basically transform into what we are witnessing currently. To answer your question, the truth of the matter is Hamas is struggling for what every other Palestinian is struggling for. And so Hamas is more or less an ideology. And so it becomes extremely difficult for you to talk about attacking certain individuals who basically are the protagonists or the front runners of this ideology without having civilian casualties. It's absolutely impossible. And that's the reason why there is the need to look at this situation from a holistic perspective. Unfortunate and regrettable as the current situation is in Palestine, The reality is that it was a time bomb waiting to explode. Sooner or later, it was obvious that this sort of situation would have unfolded. Again, like I said, unfortunate as the situation is, because what the frustration aggression theorists have alluded to over the years is exactly what was seen playing out here. Frustration naturally leads to aggression. And so where you have a situation where people are being decapitated, people are being killed, time and time again, and this is not something that you take from me, this is something that the international community has also accepted. Just last year, over 300 Palestinians were killed from the Al-Aqsa compound through Jenin and so on. One of your colleagues, as a matter of fact, was involved, the Al Jazeera reporter, Abu Akhli. And so basically, you see that these things have been ongoing and ongoing. Every other year, there's this casualty situation and so on and so forth. So basically, I don't see a way where the Israelis will retaliate given the circumstances without having civilian casualty.
I'm glad you try to make that distinction about is Palestinians and the Hamas people, because you do have Palestinians, you also have Israelis who also live in the Gaza Strip. You also have people of other Arab ethnicities who also live in the Gaza Strip. So it's good that you distinguish that there are Hamas militants and then there are also Palestinians who are just ordinary citizens who just live their lives in Gaza because they have nowhere else to go. But why do you think that the Palestinian people are not calling out Hamas, which is the militant group, for Saturday's attacks, knowing Israeli retaliation was inevitable, and then knowing that there will still also be an agitation again for self-determination of Palestine? Do the people of Palestine support Hamas militants? Do they support the militancy going on?
Well, to put this in again, let me revert back to what I said. The reason why the Israelis are actually living in the West Bank and in Gaza Strip and in Jenin and in Sheikh Jarrah and so on and so forth is because there was a Nakba. There was an invasion, there was an occupation. And this Nakba basically came to force after the Balfour Declaration, and it began in earnest in 1948. And this was what brought the influx of some Israelis into within these areas. And of course, you must understand that all of the settlements that the Israelis occupy within these areas are illegal and illegitimate settlements. And this is one of the things that the global consensus has talked about. There's a resolution to that effect to say stop the erection of these settlements. And so, of course, naturally, you will have people who have been chased out of their homes, who have been thrown out of their place, their original inhabitants, who will revolt against these individuals. And this is what has been happening over the years. Hamas is only a group of individuals who have developed a sort of ideology to say, look, we're tired. And this ideology has, unfortunately and incidentally, been militarized, so to speak. And so that's why I said in the beginning that if you look at it from within that context, then the reality is that every Palestinian is Hamas, because this is what the Palestinians have been struggling for. Which is basically what the resolutions have talked about. The resolution 181 and 242 are the resolutions I'm speaking about here, which is basically a resolution that is a global consensus at the United Nations Security Council. And the 181 resolution states and dictates that all illegal settlements being erected by Israel must be put to a stop, and that there has to be the return to the pre-1967 border, which basically gives the state of Palestine 22% of the land and the rest of the 87 to 78% to Israel. And Resolution 242 speaks to the need to establish two independent states living side by side one another. The quarrel is with the first resolution because the Palestinians will have East Jerusalem Al-Quds as their capital. And of course, the international community under the guardianship of the Trusteeship Council of the United Nations will administer the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the surrounding compounds. But because the Israelis feel and want West Bank and the Gaza Strip to fall under their purview, this is the reason why they have continued to live there. As for the other ethnicities that have lived in the West Bank and in Gaza Strip over the years, yes, of course, they have always been there. 22% of Palestine is Coptic Christians or are Coptic Christians. So basically, you have a mix of all of these individuals who have been living within this environment. And the reason why the Palestinians will have not called out Hamas is because, like I said, there's a frustration which has driven them to this point. And that's the reason why you find that there is the empathy, there is the support, there is the show of solidarity, so to speak, from the Palestinian side and even from the countries such as Lebanon, for example, Hezbollah in Lebanon, for example, and so on and so forth. This is the reason why. This is the reason why the sympathy that was evoked by the attack of Hamas on Israel is waning so fast, because when you look at the killings that have happened over the years and all of the peace processes that have been jettisoned and thrown away, it is all as a result of the Israelis refusing to accept this global consensus.
I want to say that there are blames on both sides, okay? It's not just, the Israelis who have been carrying out offenses. There have also been,
That's exactly
and
the point
history
I'm
will
making here.
show. Okay, sorry.
Yes.
There
Yes.
have also been times in history when the Palestinians and the other Arab states have also carried out offensives, against Palestine and against all the other Arabs. But before any peace talks can even happen, before coming back to the dialogue table to have discussions on this, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that every Hamas member is a dead man. I want to get your thoughts on how this adds fuel to the fire currently going on in the Middle East.
Not just Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He has always shown, well, as far as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is concerned, he has always exhibited this far-right fascist sort of rhetoric. So I don't think this is strange coming from him. But more worrisome is the fact that most supposed statesmen within the international system, particularly in the United States, have also basically supported this line of thought. We have heard over the days what, for example, Senator Graham said. Wipe them off, take them out, and so on and so forth. We heard what Nikki Haley said, how she talked about dissipate them, decimate them, and so on. So this sort of rhetorics are not very helpful. At a time like this, we should see the international community rally round, find a way to resolve this crisis, led by the United Nations, which is basically the foremost international regime saddled with the responsibility of maintaining global peace. This is a time for it to begin to invoke whatever diplomatic channel it can to see to the end of this conflict. And those kinds of rhetorics are not going to be very helpful, because these are the same types of rhetorics that we've heard over the years. Israel has a right to defend itself without even the mention of the Palestinian people. Besides, well, as much as this has taken a religious, it's the nature of the conflict. It has a religious coloration and so on and so forth. The primacy of all of this is that it's about the humanity of people first and foremost. It's about the people who should live side by side one another according to the dictates of the international system, which is something that the international community has appended its signature to, has agreed upon. That's why I called it a global consensus. So these kinds of rhetorics will only further escalate the situation, because the truth of the matter is, again, I can't stress this enough. When people are fed up, naturally they will react in a certain way. And this is basically some of the signs of that we're beginning to witness. So there's the need to de-escalate. There is no war that has ever ended on the battlefield. And I am sure the international state actors understand that. So both state actors and non-state actors need to begin to caution themselves. This kind of rhetorics, this kind of unguarded utterances and statements need to be curbed. No matter how emotional people try to get, they must also understand that while they are being emotional that Hamas has led the offensive this time, over the years, it has never been Hamas, it has been Israel. The condemnations will not just come. Finding a resolution will not come. It is far-fetched, and that's the reason why we see these things play on and on. And the truth of the matter is, no single individual or group has monopoly over violence, and we are fed up. We're tired of seeing, like you said in the beginning in your opening or before we got here, we're tired of seeing babies get killed on both sides. So there's the need to shed sword, there's the need to return back to the negotiation table and have reasonable conversation at how this is going to end. But we're not seeing that happening. Why? Because in the last few days, none of the international regimes, not a state or non-state actor, has mentioned the word ceasefire till today. Not the US president, not the Saudi foreign minister, not the Qataris, not the UAE leadership. Nobody has mentioned the word ceasefire. And so
And
long as
that
this
really makes you
continues,
think, right? Does it makes you think that, there are complexities, to this crisis, to this conflict. There are other interested parties, and I'm glad that, you wrote the book U.S. Interest in Israeli Occupation of Palestine, because it's not just the U.S. which is interested, in this crisis. You also have these other parties that you mentioned. They are also contributing to the complexities in the Middle East conflict.
Precisely. And by the way, the book is actually there's an underlining caption to it. It's implication for the two-state solution. So basically, the whole thing is U.S. interest in the occupation, Israeli occupation of Palestine, and its implication for the two-state solution. That's the whole idea of the book. The truth is that it's quite a complex situation. It is one that has a lot of implication. It is one that, when you look at it historically, even after the independence was granted to Transjordan, to Greater Syria, and these other countries by Britain, it left out Palestine for whatever reason best known to it. And here we are. Now, all of these things have metamorphosed, and we are where we are today. Actors within the region have basically politicized the affair of Palestine over the years. And that's the reason why you find that it is long-standing. It has continued to linger on. Very clearly, Saudi Arabia and Iran are at loggerheads in the region, even though China has tried to mediate and has tried to bring some kind of balance to the situation. Even there's still a long way to go from there.
It looks like this conversation has to continue sometime in the near future. We hope you will come again when we invite you. Thank you for joining us on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you for having me.
Just before we go, let's check in on those other conversations in diplomatic circles.
Improving diplomatic and economic ties between the DRC and Nigeria is uppermost on the mind of the new president of Congolese diaspora in Lagos, Mrs. Antho Bilongo. Mrs. Bilongo was sworn in during a brief ceremony in Lagos. She promised to strengthen the relations, but also commented on ongoing conflict in her country, saying all Congolese people want is peace.
All those war is coming from those international people. When they are doing well in Africa, it's not only in Congo, everywhere in Africa. When they are doing well, when they are doing well, everything will be okay. We have peace. The only thing we need, peace.
Staying with bilateral relations, the German consulate in Nigeria celebrated the German Day of Unification. Regarded as the National Day of Germany, it is usually celebrated on October the 3rd as a public holiday. It commemorates German reunification in 1990, when the German Democratic Republic joined the Federal Republic of Germany, so that for the first time since 1945, there existed a single German state. The German Consul General Wiert Borner spoke about his experience in Nigeria so far.
There is bilateral best practice already amongst us. Let me highlight a few current examples. German and Nigerian agricultural scientists are successfully cooperating in improving seeds of and farming conditions for Nigerian crops. A leading German chemical company is investing in a chemical recycling lab in Ikeja, fostering an important sector of a future circular economy. The German Chamber of Industry and Commerce in Lagos last month, together with competent Nigerian partners, launched a digital circular economy platform for the Nigerian market, giving value to a lot of material so far regarded as waste.
Finally, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says more than 200 Ukrainians, mostly women and children, have been evacuated from Israel and taken to Romania. President Zelensky says at least 260 Ukrainians were still in the Gaza Strip, adding that Ukraine is working with its partners from Tel Aviv to Romania on Saturday, and another flight to take 155 people out of Israel was planned for Saturday.
And that's our program today. You might need to watch this and last week's edition again in case you missed anything in the conversations. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.